this event. We are celebrating Child Protection Week, and we look forward to engaging with you soon. So we're just going to give a few minutes for people to join, and then we'll get going with the program. I see Candace Austin, you have your hand up. Would you like to contribute something or just mention anything? The chat box should be open if you want to type something there. So Lisa Swani, there might be a tech problem. So from ICT, Ayanda, do you just want to open up those people's microphones so we can yell at Miss Austin, or Lisa Swani wants to say?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Miss Austin, hello.
And no, I had my hand up because it seemed like I was in the panelists link and not in the attendees link, and I just wanted to know if I was in the right one.
That's fine. As long as you can hear us and see us, that's fine too.
Can you hear me, Prof? ICT is trying to help with the picture.
Thanks, Prof. Nzama. We can hear you loud and clear. We can't see you, but we can hear you, and that's fine. Right, so folks, thank you very much for joining us. We're just giving the first 5 minutes for people to join and use the link and sort out their tech issues. And it's on the program under the title of Arrivals. And I like that because dealing with technology is not always easy for everybody. And the link sometimes takes a little time to open up Zoom in the background. So please be patient with us. Give us these first 5 minutes just to get things sorted out, and we'll be starting shortly. Professor Nzama is our Deputy Dean of Teaching and Learning, has had a few technology challenges this morning. Her camera is being sorted out by our tech support, and we saw her briefly there upside down. So we look forward to seeing you right there out soon. There we go, Professor Nzama. Well done. We're very glad that you've sorted out. You're with us now in living color.
Now sorted out.
All right, it is now 10:05, and I just want to welcome everybody who's joined us for this webinar. My name is Professor John Rotenbach. I'm the head of the social work program at the University of Zululand, and it's my honor to be part of this program as the facilitator. We are celebrating Child Protection Week, and we're very, very grateful that you've decided to click on the link that we shared and to join us this morning. Representing our Vice Chancellor and the University of Zululand is Professor Shakane. Professor Shakane is the Deputy Dean of Research and Internationalization in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science. And I'm going to hand over to her now to get the program started. So, Professor Shakane, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. John. Good morning, dear colleagues. In absentia, I would like to acknowledge the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand, Professor Xoliswa Mtose, our DVCs of Teaching and Learning, DVC of Research and Internationalization, Innovation and Internationalization, and our DVC of Institutional Support, and our Deans of the 4 faculties of the university, in particular our Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Muphume Masoha. Program Director, I am cognizant of the fact that I'm stepping into big shoes today to convey greetings on behalf of the Principal and Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand, Professor Xoliswa Mtose, who was supposed to open this Vice Chancellor's webinar. Unfortunately, she is committed elsewhere. I wish to impress the fact that our university management rallies behind this webinar, given its importance and relevance. One is mindful of the fact that this Vice Chancellor's webinar series, organized by the Faculties of Humanities and Social Sciences, specifically the Applied Social Sciences cluster, as the whole world commemorates Child Protection Week to address child vulnerability to abuse, neglect, and violence in homes, schools, and other spaces so that children live, learn, and play. As we commemorate, we equally mourn and are pained at the way children are treated. These challenges faced by children globally, regionally, and locally cover, among other, social ills such as child labor, abuse, rape, ritual killings, and neglect. National Child Protection Week is commemorated in the country annually around this time of the year, from the last week of May and the first week of June, to raise awareness of the rights of children. And it is specifically articulated in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and the Children's Act. The aim of Child Protection Week, colleagues, in South Africa is to raise awareness on the need to protect children and influence social protest and activism against abuse, exploitation, neglect, and all forms of violence. I wish to quote from Nelson Mandela: "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." Our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Stanley Maphosa, and all in attendance today, we believe that the higher education sector has an important role to play in child protection. As the University of Zululand, we are also responding to the government call to support Child Protection Week by ensuring that the most vulnerable in our society do not suffer abuse through our various programs in the university. We are also reminded again by Nelson Mandela that our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. Those who abuse them tear at the fabric of our society and weaken our nation. In this manner, we are convinced that it is also in our hands to stop the cycle of neglect, abuse, violence, and exploitation of children through multidisciplinary teamwork, as evident today in the Vice Chancellor's webinar by the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. Our academics in social work, sociology, anthropology and development studies, psychology, criminal justice, law, health, education, and other related fields have expertise in using appropriate and participatory approach to engage with and promote the views of children, young people, families, and other vulnerable population groups on issues affecting them. Colleagues, this webinar comes at the right time when the faculty has changed its name from arts to humanities and social sciences to refocus its business to develop the distinctiveness of UniZulu as a node of African thought, thereby making it an African university which offers quality and distinguishable qualifications. In line with the university strategy to build and maintain collaborations and partnership with key stakeholders like the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund partnership in our midst today, this partnership and collaborative efforts have common goals of realizing the rights of children to protection, health, economic resilience, empowerment, and leadership to support in all circumstances, including strengthening the research and child advocacy and the rights of children. The university is committed to enhance outcomes for children, young people, and families through quality research, program evaluations, training and community education, advocacy and policy development, and to remain true to the vision of Mandela. Let us reach out to the children. Let us do whatever we can to support their fight, to rise above their pain and suffering. In this case, the Vice Chancellor requested that the faculty develops a Masters of Arts in Child Studies program focusing on child and youth and family welfare issues that will offer professional training for interdisciplinary applied research and practice specifically in children's studies with a focus on community level engagement research. I wish you well as you advance and create knowledge to improve the safety and well-being of all children, young people, families, and communities. Since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, we have learned how children continue to grapple with unprecedented hardships that make them vulnerable to abuse. And I hope this webinar will disseminate knowledge to inform policy, service delivery, and practice in dealing with children issues. The theme is very clear, colleagues, and very resolute. Let us all continue to protect children during COVID-19 and beyond. Thank you and best wishes for today.
Wow, thank you very much, Professor Shakane. You have represented the Vice Chancellor extremely well. And I think your words have set the tone for the webinar today. Yeah, we really want to thank you and also thank the Vice Chancellor for her support and encouragement to our faculty to be part of her webinar series. Our Dean, Professor Masoga, is currently unwell, but he is in the meeting. And we really do appreciate your support, Prof, and also your encouragement. To represent you, the Dean, we've asked the Deputy Dean of Teaching and Learning, Professor Nzama, who's had a few tech problems, to introduce our speaker today. So, Prof Nzama, are you able to do that now? Thank you very much.
And thank you, Program Facilitator, for the opportunity to welcome and introduce our distinguished guest speaker, who has graced this event with his presence. I'm doing this on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Masoga. The guest speaker's academic qualifications, which include a master's in development studies and PhD in social sciences, as well as his extensive experience and diverse expertise, make him to be the most relevant person to address us to this auspicious event, to which the Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand, Professor Mtosa, has invited us to mark the Child Protection Week. The guest speaker's illustrious journey includes serving in a number of leadership and strategic positions, such as the following: Area Development Manager at Guamapumulo in KwaZulu-Natal, Monitoring and Evaluation Manager. These managerial positions prepared him to become the Operations Programs Director, where he provided strategic leadership and oversight of 18 programs in South Africa and other donor-funded projects. He also worked as a Deputy National Director of Chief Executive Officer on operations matters. He later became a Humanitarian Emergency Affairs Advisor, Senior Manager, where he conceived the Humanitarian Emergency Affairs Department and led it. As indicative of his diverse interests during the same period, he supervised a master's degree student under the University of Free State. Continuing with his journey, he became the Advocacy Director, which allowed him to provide strategic leadership for the WVSA advocacy policy and programs. He went on to serve as a liaison manager, director grade, which paved the way for him to become the international and national liaison manager, chief grade now. In this position, he provided executive overall leadership to the Academy of Science of South Africa, abbreviated as ASAF, International and National Liaison Program. He then developed new academies in Africa, which is really commendable, and conducted joint bilateral activities and through science advice and science diplomacy. He currently serves as a Chief Programs Officer of the Mandela Children's Fund, leading 5 programs of the fund, which are child survival, development and driving, child safety and protection, youth leadership program, sustainable livelihoods, special projects and monitoring and evaluation. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the guest speaker, Dr. Stanley Maphosa. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Professor Nzama. I really do appreciate those words of introduction. Professor Nzama, you've summed up so much of what we are expecting from our guest speaker today, and it is a real honor. Dr. Maphosa, if you want to take the stage, I hold in my hand a gift I was given when I left my undergraduate university. I was serving on a student body, and they gave me a book, Nelson Mandela Speaks. And today we hear from the representative of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund about what he wants to say to us. So over to you, Dr. Maphosa. Please be part of the UniZulu family and share from your heart.
Thank you very much, Professor John, the host and the moderator of this session. Thank you so much to Professor Shokane, who represented the Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Mjose, and thank you for the generous introduction that you have done, Professor Nzama. All colleagues present, members of the panel that are going to speak after me, leaders of the University of Zululand, colleagues and friends that are joining us in this discussion today. Thank you so much for an opportunity to come through and participate in this prestigious discussion that's organized by the Vice Chancellor for us to be able to celebrate the Child Protection Week, which is ending in a few days from today. And the topic of my discussion is, as you can see it there, we are addressing child vulnerability to abuse, neglect, and violence in homes, schools, and other spaces where children are found. And we're doing that so that children can be able to live, learn, and play in safety and protection. When you are reading the government's theme for this year, the concentration is on teenage pregnancy, which is a reaction to the Stats SA report that indicated that children as young as 12 years or somewhere there are getting pregnant in this country, and in large numbers. And you want to ask a question whether they get pregnant because they participate in those activities voluntarily, or there are people that abuse them so that they find themselves pregnant at that age. And the other question that one asks is, why is this happening in a country which has so much legislation, so much systems and structures, so much awareness that has been created through the Child Protection Week and other campaigns like this one for years? And maybe in our discussion today, we'll try to answer that, and the panel members that are going to speak after me will also be able to help us answer those questions that keep running in our minds forever and ever. But as we are speaking and this discussion is a road towards addressing the vulnerability of children that manifests itself through the abuse, the neglect, and the violence that takes place in all the spaces I have already indicated here. To start the ball rolling, I want us to look at some of these sayings or some of these quotations from Nelson Mandela, who said safety and security does not happen the result of the collective consensus and public investment. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in any society, a free life that is free from both violence and fear. And there can be no keener society. There cannot be a keener revelation than a society's way of treating its own children and youth. And lastly, the quotation says, our children are the rock on which our future will be built. Our greatest asset as a nation is those children. And they will be the leaders of our country, the creators of our national wealth, those who care for and protect our people. When you're looking at these three quotations that all of us may have come across at one point or another, and I heard Professor Shokane also mentioning one of them, it is a history that happened to the former national president, Nelson Mandela, when in 1995, he founded what we call today the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. And he did it by pledging a third of his presidential salary on a monthly basis to be put aside as an endowment to start this organization called the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. And then he later on personally fundraised to ensure that this organization becomes a going concern that still continues to be there even after he is no longer around. When asked in one of the interviews how this organization is going to continue in his absence, he said the organization will continue if there are still good people like me and you that care about the future and the current state of children. And secondly, why did he start this particular organization? I want to advance three reasons why he started this organization. The first one is that he understood an obligation, a personal obligation, and that's the personal obligation for all of us, including yourself, to protect all children. And all children means exactly that. All children must be protected. And it's an obligation from a personal point of the former president and for all of us. And the second reason is the belief that children are the most valuable asset, national asset that we have. The potential to create national wealth and protect the future generations can only be unleashed through the nurturing care, the education, the dignity, and the respect that we accord to children. When you look at the word children in isiZulu, which I'm comfortable with, I don't know other languages, you will already see that the word children in isiZulu, umntwana, means a very small person or a mini person. And that word already shows the kind of treatment that this little human being or miniature human being must be treated in that way. Seen and not heard, not consulted, not recognized, and just be told what to do. And when they are told what to do, they ask, how high should I jump? And not why should I jump? And I don't know whether that's correct or not, and we'll discover as we go further. And the third reason I'm advancing why this organization was created by Nelson Mandela is because he knew that a movement was required. A movement, I underline movement, was required, and that movement should be rights-based, not welfare-based, but rights-based, and that movement would change the way society treats its children. moving on, you will find that the organization then was built, was founded, and we have the vision there that is up there, and we have the mission there that is up there. I like the mission. It's 4 words. The 4 words in the mission says, giving the voice, and the voice is participation. The voice is inclusion of children in matters that concern them. The voice is advocacy for children. The voice is not tokenism or decoration by use of children. And it also talks about the dignity of children, dignity in interventions that ensure that children, are treated and cared for in a better way. And the other word is African child. And one asks me, what do you mean by African child? I just mean African child. Any child that is found in the continent of Africa, black, white, Indian, colored, must be given a voice and dignity. And the last words is movement, a rights-based movement. And the movement doesn't start at the top in the ivory towers of government and parliament. The movement starts where people are, right there in Mtuba, right there in Nziki, right there in Nkwama Pumulo, where the people are facing these issues on a day-to-day basis. So the organization was founded, as I've indicated, and the purpose is primarily to change the way society treats its children and youth through giving them the voice and dignity of an African child and building that movement that I've talked about. And today, as I speak, we are seated at a space where we are implementing a 5-year strategy that starts in 2022, right up to 2027. And we call that strategy the legacy in action. And the legacy of the former president, Nelson Mandela, his legacy, but now the legacy in action. And if you saw the picture in the beginning of that child flying, we want to give the children wings to fly by doing these 3 strategic objectives. The first one is to empower families and communities to adequately care for their own children and youth. I like the word that says their children. These children are not for government, it's their children, but we need to empower the families and communities to adequately care for these children and the youth, adequately. And the second one is to create platforms that will amplify the voice of children and youth. And I think this is a platform where we are amplifying these voices. And somebody would say, you are not a child and you are not a youth. Why are you amplifying the voice? I'm amplifying the voice so that their voices be amplified. And we're going and we continue to engage them as well to do that for themselves. And the third one is to address and influence government shortfalls. I think government can't do everything, even if sometimes we think it should, and sometimes we wish it should. And all of us that are here from the academic spaces, from the civil society spaces, and as individuals, we can hold government accountable and ensure that we address and influence those shortfalls in government. What that simply means is that we will not always agree where we should not agree. And we will not always oppose for the sake of opposing, but we'll address and influence the shortfalls that are in government. And finally, we'll create collaborative environments where in those environments, we amplify the impact of the fund as an organization on children and youth through strategic partnerships. And Professor Shokane has indicated that the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund is creating a partnership with the University of Zululand. And the reasons are clear, because the university is located in the province where about 8 districts are still heavily affected by issues of child mortality, about issues of child crimes, child poverty, children lacking empowerment and leadership. And those are the provinces and the districts, those are the districts in the province where the fund will be doing a lot of work beginning from next year as we roll out our strategy. And therefore the university finds itself located in the right place for us to create a strategic partnership. And we hear from you as people that are in the academic space to give us what we call evidence-based programming, as well as evidence-based advocacy, so that together we can be able to address these issues. But however, ladies and gentlemen, this lecture has nothing to do about Nelson Mandela, and it also doesn't have nothing to do with the fund or the organization that I work for. It is about addressing child vulnerability, abuse, neglect, and violence in the homes, schools, and other spaces, so that children can live and play. Nelson Mandela, as well as the fund, I've just given this background so that they provide a good case study and example for what this lecture is going to recommend as we come to the close of this discussion. Moving on, I show you the focus areas that we will be handling. And there are 4 focus areas in our strategic period, which include safety of children, which we are discussing today, but also health of children, leadership and empowerment of youth and children, economic resilience, which means that the families where children stay should be empowered to be resilient, to bounce back, especially when a disaster like the floods have happened, when COVID has happened, and all the other issues that are breeding ground for children not to be safe should enable them to be resilient through some economic activities that they participate in and meet their basic needs. The assumption is that without basic needs and with poverty in the family, it is easy for children to be abused by neighbors, to be abused by relatives, to be abused by other people that have resources around the area where the child is located. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the legislative efforts, as I've indicated earlier, crime statistics, evaluations that have been commissioned by the fund, both government and civil society reports that we have read and all of us may know, on a socio-economic state of the children, there is an agreement that child protection and safety is still a grave concern and a key priority for national development in South Africa today. Reading and listening to the crime statistics that were published or announced by the Minister of Police in July and September, we see that there is still a high number of criminal cases around children and between children themselves and adults and children in our country. And therefore, we need to be addressing these issues and ensuring that children can be able to play, can be able to experiment, can be able to learn, and can be able to be safe in the communities where they live and in the homes that they live. What do we need to know? What do we need to know? I'm trying to, the first thing is that children are persons that are younger than 18 years. Everybody that is younger than 18 years is a child. And when you're looking at the legislation of this country, there is a confusion around the ages. There are certain times where legislation allows children that are 12 years old to access condoms. There are times when you read also legislation that also says consent to sex is 16 years. And so 12, 16, 18, where do we draw the line? And where is the child located? And we want to remind ourselves that everybody that is 18 and younger is a child. Whether they consent or what, they are still a child. And secondly, all children are vulnerable by virtue of their age and dependency. Because children are young and because they are still dependent on someone, their vulnerability is always an issue that needs to be addressed by all of us as society. Thirdly, South Africa has some of the most progressive child protection legislation, guidelines, frameworks, policies, and even structures in the world. And one asked a question that I've asked earlier, that if the legislation is so good and the paperwork is so good, what is the problem with the implementation? Is the problem based on the fact that these legislation are written by some consultant somewhere, and those that are meant to be implementing them don't understand a thing in what they are supposed to be implementing? Or those that are supposed to be implementing and those that are in the legislation space are not speaking to one another? Or there is not adequate resources, be they financial, be they personnel, be they space, to be able to implement these beautiful legislative instruments? I don't know. Maybe you know. The fourth thing is that poverty, child abuse, child mortality, youth unemployment are major contributors to child rights violation and child abuse and the issues that we are dealing with today. So I've indicated earlier that the assumption that we are asking academics to help us is whether it is true that if you are poor, you can easily be abused, and you can easily see your children not surviving the first 1,000 days. And at the end, you can even see your young people not getting employed. Is there a connection between those things, poverty, child abuse, child mortality, and youth unemployment? Because they seem to be, or they are, from what we read, a major contributor to the violation and the abuse that children are facing in our country today. Then the fifth thing is the online safety of children. During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a new phenomenon that came around the online learning, e-learning, and stuff like that, some of which was not popular to many of our young people and children in this country. And that became popular, and it also started to have its own challenges by exposing children to the digital spaces that have really led to what we call cyber crime and cyber abuse, which may not be as easy to deal with than the other abuse cases that we see, because that happens behind the doors, and that happens maybe in areas where some parents are not able to enter. And we have a challenge. Climate change is also a major threat to child development, and it also affects the abuse issues that we are dealing with. The sixth thing is that children change over time. The children that we were when we grew up may not necessarily be the children that we are raising today. What they experience, what they know, what they talk about, what they are taught, who they associate with may not be the same as what we used to be. And some of us as parents, as leaders, as academia, are still living in the yesteryears, and children have moved so far ahead of us that we need to be catching up The environment they live in, learn, play is also changing over time. Children thrive best in families and enabling communities, and we are challenging all of us to be able to enable children to live better and safe wherever we find them. Children have rights, and these rights are enshrined in our constitution and legislative framework. Actually, I always hear people, when we talk about the rights of children, they jump to responsibilities. And I'm not comfortable with that discussion, because before you rush into the responsibilities, just address the rights first and be clear about the rights first. Because trying to balance with the responsibilities before you have clarified and cleared the rights is tantamount to another form of abuse. And the legislation is clear, and I'll put it down there for you that can see my presentation. The basic conditions of employment, the Child Justice Act, the Criminal Law, the Domestic Violence Act, the Film and Publication Act, all those ensure that the rights of children are observed. And I think we're at a space where we are not going back about that. And therefore, all of us must teach ourselves and educate ourselves about those rights and begin to uphold them for the sake of the children in our country. What should we be doing as I conclude? Professor John, I'm concluding. What should we be doing? I propose a few things that we should be doing. Number one, we should be collaborating with stakeholders. We should be working together. We should be destroying some of those silos that are existing. We should be coming together more and more often, so that we advocate for and we implement relevant policies and practices. I agree that some of the policies that I have mentioned may not be relevant anymore, may not be well implemented, but let's come together and make this thing happen. No one is going to address this issue except us. The second thing, we need to be supporting the promising models of child safeguarding that are out there. There are many promising models. There are many things that people are doing. Some of them are not recorded. Some of them are not documented. Some of them are not brought into the fore. They are still being done and successful somewhere in Gwangolosi. They are still done and successful somewhere in Ishowe. They are still done and successful somewhere in Ikopo. And no one is documenting them and saying, let's do this. And because we have done it in ABCD, it can also work in DEF. And let's put our efforts in those promising models. Let's finance and quality assure the child protection interventions that are already being run by different organizations, including government. Let us contribute to good evidence, of good practice. And the university is well placed in that space. And in this case, I'm talking about the University of Zululand. Thirdly, let us strengthen the social services workforce. Social service workforce that includes the social workers, that includes the teachers, that includes everyone else that deals with children. They should be strengthened and capacitated. I always ask a question that if teachers go through training at universities that are prestigious like UniZulu and they are taught not to beat children, why do they continue to beat them? Why do they continue to kill them? They are not even beating, they are killing. If they are properly strengthened and taught and followed up, why do we still see these things done by professionals that have been trained and educated not to do these things? Fourthly, let us document and share effective child and safety protection approaches for the sake of replication, upscaling, and ensuring that the best practices don't happen in one place, but throughout the country. I finish up with this, that the approach that the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund uses is called the socio-ecological approach or framework, where we put the child at the center of all these other systems, the exosystem and the other systems where their friends, their school and family in the next level, their neighbors and community and media, and finally their attitudes, cultural ideologies, and the world in which the child stays in. So let us put the children at the center of all that we do, because they are not only the leaders of tomorrow, they are the leaders of now and today. I thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. I thank you.
Wow. Thank you very, very much, Professor, Dr. Mposa, but we want to call you Professor because you professed today what your heart is, and we can see your heart is full of love and care for children. You stated something earlier which grabbed my attention. You said that Nelson Mandela was asked, how will the Children's Fund continue after he leaves or after his salary dries up, which he was generously contributing to the fund? And your answer was, it will continue as long as there are good people who care about children. And we can see that as the Chief Programs Officer at the Nelson Mandela Fund, the fund is being run by good people. Your heart is for the fund, your heart is for children. Behind you, you can see the word serve, like Mandela, and you are definitely serving with the same heart and passion and care that he had for children. So we want to thank you so much for your contribution, your lecture today, the passion that you have, and the excellent presentation that you've put together. Please take our grateful thanks to your entire team who are behind you in implementing that vision. So ladies and gentlemen, everyone who's joined as the attendees of this webinar, we want to thank you. For those who missed the excellent introduction and welcome, I want you to all know that this session is being recorded and broadcast on YouTube. So apart from those attending live in this webinar now, there are many people on the YouTube channel also watching, the University of Zululand's YouTube channel. The program now moves to a panel discussion. And I'd like the panelists please to open up their camera so that I can introduce you. And then we'll be handing over to each panelist in turn to share a little reflection on the theme for today and on Dr. Mposa's lecture. So I'll see Dr. Bula first. She's with us. So by way of introduction, there's Professor Mbele, and lastly, Tobeka Mtini Manunika. Thank you very much, colleagues, for joining us. To put this in context for those watching, the Faculty of Humanities and Social Science has got a number of different clusters. Our cluster is called the Applied Social Science Cluster. It's made up of the Department of Sociology, the Department of Psychology, the Department of Social Work, and the Department of Criminal Justice. And so we're going to call on colleagues from the number of those departments to share some reflections. And first, Dr. Bula from Sociology, we're going to give you 5 minutes just to speak, to share your insights into Child Protection Week, and also to reflect on Dr. Maposa's lecture. So over to you, please.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our officiating chairs for the wonderful opportunity. I must, firstly, I think, contribute. Our guest speaker pointed out the number of acts that we are that actually stand for the protection of children. But for me, being protective of a child, the basics has to be in place. And part of the basics, and if we go to the Maslow's hierarchy, for instance, of basic needs, and if the bottom is food, nutrition, shelter, home, if those are not met, naturally the trajectory and the tradition and the transition from child development into adult development, the chains are going to be broken, in my opinion. And this, firstly, needs to be disseminated as information, the importance of having those foundational phases correctly protected, correctly implemented through strategies, policies, programs, and appropriate structures. But just a few mere examples I just want to pick up from the presentation earlier on. All of those acts that the Prof earlier on explained to us in his presentation that highlights and protects children, we are now in the year 2022. For me, contextually, I question. Similarly, I've also personally have recently been engaged in research. And if you look at the South African food and nutrition security policy, in fact, I just pulled it out to show you. And here we're looking at a 2013 policy as well. And here again, I must tell you, this policy itself does not specifically articulate any provision for children's nutritional and food needs. And this is contributing towards, of course, the high mortality rates in children, double burden malnutrition, the continual malnourishment rates that are escalating in KZN. And I also personally feel, I don't know if anybody's aware, KwaZulu-Natal has got one of 3 provinces that have the highest population of children in South Africa. My concern is that understanding what child abuse is, what child neglect is, has to be very context specific, has to be culturally specific, has to be within the appropriate context. From a sociological, social-cultural perspective, I want to indicate to you that culture also plays a very different role, and in many ways, in ways not that are unknown or have become normative practice for certain cultures, behavior patterns can contribute to child neglect. A small example, I know for a fact from a little bit of hands-on research that I began engaging in very recently, and the study especially focused at malnutrition and nutrition of children. If you look at some food insecure households in the middle of Zululand or outside of KwaZulu-Natal, for instance, it's a patriarchal culture, a practice where, for example, the bulk of the food gets distributed amongst the men of the household first. And this is surely based on the fact that it's seen that that's their sense of entitlement, that's their place in the household, they are the primary breadwinners, and the children end up eating, of course, smaller portions or inadequate portions that may not necessarily be nutritionally balanced and so forth. So from my perspective, I would say there's so much more to understanding and correcting procedures of what is child abuse and child neglect. That contextually, the terms overlap, but I think our basic and the way to go forward would be to actually identify and conceptualize per context. What does it mean to neglect a child? How are we not meeting their basic needs? What is the greater impact of this? And I just personally feel that there isn't enough education going around on a national level that articulate these factors.
Wonderful contribution, Dr. Mbula. We really appreciate your perspective coming from sociology. Thank you very much. We'll invite you back to be part of the panel for question and answer time just now. We're going to move on to our Professor of Psychology, Professor Mbele. If you don't mind sharing your screen, please, and you have time now to reflect and respond to the lecture. Thank you very much, Professor Mbele.
Thank you, Prof. Reitzenberg. And thank you, Dr. Maposa, for this inspiring talk. You know, as it has been mentioned that Nelson Mandela said the fund will continue with good people. I really do attest to that. When I was asked to comment on this talk, obviously, I didn't have the privilege of having your slides before, so I had to prepare something. And as I was perusing, I saw in the cabinet's report that the youth program for 2022 the theme is promoting sustainable livelihoods and resilience of young people for a better tomorrow. So I just decided that I will talk around resilience. And of course, I would like to comment on your speech today on a few things. I think it's 1 or 2 points. So looking at resilience, resilience is defined for those who are not familiar. I'm aware that that different peoples at different levels of understanding in this is that resilience, it is the capacity to maintain competent functioning in the face of major stressors, okay? Some people usually saying it's bouncing back after a person has experienced a stressful situation or has been in a stressful environment, okay? Here we are talking about abuse, neglect, and violence. And we know all those things, they will result to stress. And we also think of a lot of other conditions that may arise as a result of that. But what I want to point out is that resilience does not just happen. There are certain qualities in an individual or a person or a child, if you like, that will cause that person to bounce back. And if those qualities or those characteristics are not there, then the person cannot bounce back. And then what do you have? You have suicide or teenage suicide. You have all sorts of problems, depression, etc. Now, there are 4 patterns that have been identified in people when in the studies of individual resilience. Remember, there are also community resilience studies that have been conducted. So the first one is a dispositional pattern of a person. In other words, the makeup of the person, the characteristics, the sense of identity, autonomy, what the person is made of, good physical health and appearance, you know, all those things. Number 2, a relational pattern. In other words, how is a person able to respond to other people and live together with other people? The third one, situational pattern, you know, where you expect individuals to be able to manage the situation where they are in, whether be it a stressful situation, how do I get away from this situation? What are the survival skills that I can use? And then the last one is the philosophical pattern. What is the worldview of that particular person? Even if it is a child, what are the beliefs that have been installed in a child, or what characteristics are there? So one can ask and say, okay, you're talking about resilience, about children, etc. How do we achieve this? How do we instill this resilience to these people? But before I say that, I just want to mention that resiliency is a theory that emerged because we didn't want to focus. I remember you were asking and were saying why people or children are in crime and all that. Resilience is saying, let us not look on the early developmental phases. Sometimes we say children grew up in poverty, so that is why they are thieves, that is why they steal, that is why they do all those things. They are saying, let us look at the few that are actually recovering or that actually do not engage in all those activities and look what has happened to them. So before going out, I just want to read just a few statistics that I have checked. The 2019 statistics on teenage pregnancy, I'll just mention numbers because if you say 50%, it can be 50% of 10 people. So I'll just mention numbers. In the health report, there were 129,222 births that were given by teenagers or adolescents. That was statistics for 2019. And then if you look at divorce at the divorce statistics, there were in 2020, there were 16,097 completed divorce forms in 2020. And then from there, okay, I'm coming to the percentage now because, of course, when I was checking these statistics, I was not given numbers. There are 54.8% of children below the age of 18 years. That's where part of that divorce statistics. In other words, those were the children with parents that were divorced. So what do these statistics say to us? They are telling us that there is quite a number of children that were born by teenagers, 129,000 and some more, that were born by teenagers. Teenagers are people that still want to carry on in education, careers, whatever it is they engage in. We do want them to do that so that they can support their children. But now who's there to look after these children now when they go back to school, when they seek careers or whatever it is? So those children are left vulnerable. They are not there. Then again, if you see divorced parents, there is a chance of single parenthood. The single parent may not have all the facilities. Sometimes the fathers do not support after divorce, or the mothers, it depends. So who is looking after those children? Because these parents have got to work in order to support. And then in addition to that, okay, people would say it's grandmothers. I am a grandmother, but I'm working. I don't have time to sit and look after the children. Grandmothers nowadays are also working. And then now you find that besides that, let's say the parents and everybody are not divorced. Now the parents are working, mother and father. We fly to America. We are going to present papers. Who is left with the children? Of course, obviously, it's caregivers. Sometimes grandmothers, but some grandmothers are working. So we are looking at a number of young people and children that do not have direction. Well, maybe they do have some direction. Let me not say not at all, but they are not looked after properly because everybody is busy trying to survive. So what is it that we need to do now? Obviously, we look into the places where the children are for most of the time. Number one, it's schools. Children spend most of the time in schools. What is happening there in schools? Okay, the government, I'm going to the point now that was mentioned that maybe the government is not doing enough. In schools, there is a life orientation curriculum. I'm saying this because I'm a psychologist and an educational psychologist. There is a life orientation curriculum which is offered in schools for children, and it talks about personal well-being. It teaches children citizenship, education, recreation, and physical activity, careers, etc. And what do we do when they come to varsity? We don't even acknowledge the marks that the children are gaining because they usually come with high marks. Okay, we can argue and say, well, the teachers just give marks or whatever is happening, but because it is there, government is doing something. Schools are delivering whichever way we know the problems in schools. And then now we neglect, we don't allocate, we say, no, we don't count life orientation subjects when we are looking at the points for admission into the university. Now, what is it telling us? What are we doing about these children that are coming? Are we telling them that what they did in order to, what they were taught, is not important enough? That is one. Number two, higher health. I'm part of the university committee in higher health. And the government has also given money. There is money. It comes from from the Department of Education, the DHET, for higher health, where we are supposed to work with women's health, men's health, mental health, addiction, GBV, reproductive health, and all those things. And mostly they affect young people. Okay, they are above 18 years, Dr. Maphosa, but they are the future parents. We don't. When we sit there in the committee and one report, it usually becomes a one-man show because usually our clinic, university clinic, is the one that usually engages a lot there. I don't even say colleagues are not doing anything, but we don't get reports to say, okay, we've been working with students on this, with students. In our faculty, I only received the reports from a philosophy, Candice, thank you, girl. So I don't even say you're not doing anything, but you must show that you are aware of these things and you do engage with students on this, and then you give reports. But then again,
I'm going to ask you to say your final sentence. We're going to be moving on because of time. I'm sure we need to invite you as a speaker to one of the webinars, because I know you have lots to profess on this subject, and I'm enjoying it. I didn't want to interrupt you at all, because you are really speaking to my heart. But just your final concluding thought, and then we're going to move on to the next discussant, if you don't mind.
Okay, I just want to mention, we conducted a study because there is a problem with alcoholism on adolescents, especially. So we conducted it. It was a PhD study. And then we were looking what went wrong with parenting. And we found all these problems that I'm mentioning. The grandparents that can look after the children that are not working, they say, we can't talk to them anymore. They beat us because those children are not disciplined. So in conclusion, I just want to say, child protection safety is not just for children that we are protecting children, but we are also protecting ourselves as grandparents, as the society, so that if these children are not in line, then they will actually cause harm to us, because some become, well, the popular word is para, but they become street children.
Yeah.
They become, some of them are incarcerated, some of them are all those. So child protection must be taken seriously. That is my conclusion, because it's not only to protect the children, but protecting us or the society as well. Thank you.
I love that concluding thought. Thank you very, very much, Professor Mbele. It's so important. Child protection is about protecting the children, but also protecting us from children who are not well raised and have got very poor backgrounds and may make bad decisions that affect all of us. So thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to the contribution from the social work department. Mrs. Thobeka Ntini Makununika joins us, and Thobeka is spearheading the development of a master's degree in children's studies at the University of Zululand. She has also contributed with Professor Shokane to a chapter in an Introduction to Social Work book, and that chapter focuses on children and families. And so, Thobeka, thank you very much for joining us. Please take your time to reflect on the title for today and also on Dr. Maphosa's lecture. Thank you very much, Thobeka. Over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much, Dr. Maphosa, for a wonderful presentation this morning. In your presentation, there's a question that I saw where you asked us, and the question reads as, what is each of us doing to contribute to changing the way society treats our children, right where we are, where we live, where we learn, play, and work. And I'm so grateful that Prof. Rothenberg already unpacked what some of the things that we are doing here at the University of Zululand as social work department, which is the development of the social work masters on children's studies, which if some of you were here before, Prof. Shokane has already mentioned. It's one of the things that in academia that we are doing, looking at how we can further studies of children, how we can understand children more, to develop more practices and to answer some of the pragmatic issues that are out there. So those are some of the things that we are doing. And I would advise everyone in here to actually ask themselves that question. What is it that you are doing? You don't have to be a person who is working or in the discipline of social work or sociology or applied human sciences where you deal with children directly, but you can be a neighbor, you can be a mother. What are you doing? What are you saying? What is your response when you see that a child is being abused? You as a teacher, what is it that you are doing? Who are you reaching out to get help in some of the institutions that are available out there? And that's a very important question that we should ask ourselves as individuals and where we are in our disciplines and in our fields, and just as members are of society. So a lot has been mentioned in the presentation and with some of the panelists here, talking about some of the structural injustices, I term it, because when you talk about poverty, when you talk about child abuse, child mortality, violence, unemployment, those are all structural injustices that we face as South Africa, as Africa in general. And the systemic oppressions and injustices are all bearers of the risks that children face in their daily lives. So when it comes to children being protected, besides the institutions that are there, we must remember that the families and the communities themselves, they need to be environments that are enabling for the child to thrive. A question was posed by Dr. Maphosa earlier on, and he asked if a child who is in poverty is supposed to be at risk. And maybe this is something that we could think about, that of course, when the environment is not enabling, when the environment is covered by these injustices that are so many, it will obviously affect the community, it will affect the family. And if that happens, it will definitely affect the child. We want this holistic development, and we want the child to thrive. If these environments are not enabling, and because of these structural injustices, then there will definitely be a problem in the child herself or himself as a being. How will the child thrive when the child is not eating enough, is not getting enough nutrition, when the child is not being cared for, is not going to school, and all of those things? So it's very important that we look at the structural injustices. It's such a big task. We can't just look at the child, we can't just look at the community or the family, but we need to look at the entire environment and how it is enabling to the families and the communities in order to enable the child to thrive. So although we have to address the structural issues, and we do call upon a lot of institutions and organizations, we count social development, health, child justice, all of those institutions to act. We also need to be careful of overemphasizing institutions as guarantors of justice without considering the influences on human behavior. And what I mean by that, I mean the attitudes that are in the communities and in families, the norms, the traditions. What is the meaning and the definition of a child in those communities and in that family setup? We need to reflect on that. What are the attitudes? Some people in communities, they talk about, when you talk about child protection and you talk about children's rights, they question that. They ask, like, why do we have these children's rights? They are the ones that make children be abusive or bully other children. And maybe that's something that we need to interrogate further, so that we understand how much people in communities understand rights, understand human rights, understand children's rights. What does that mean in practice? What does that mean when we actually see it, besides looking at it on paper? What are the attitudes of people when it comes to that? And maybe that needs to change. Also, Prof. Mbele spoke about schools. which I think is a very important issue, and it's kind of a topical issue in social work as well, where we are questioning why social workers are not in schools. Schools are the second home of children. If the child is not at school, the child is at home. And that space, I think we, speaking now from a perspective of the social work discipline and being a social work practitioner myself, that we should be placed there. Teachers are not ready to deal with social issues that children face. Social workers should be there. It should be a conversation that is taken further than why are social workers not there? Why are psychologists not there? Yes, some schools have the privilege of social workers, of social workers and psychologists being there. But what about the majority? The majority do not have. It is an ongoing debate, and I really think it should be implemented. It's a very important point of intervention, because children, that's where they are. That's their first point. After home, it's school. After school, it's home. And just lastly, about amplifying voices of children. I think that child participation is very, very important. And some of the, I think it has not been mentioned by some of the panelists here about child participation. One understand that their age and dependence makes them vulnerable, but let's not make the mistake of vulnerability to voicelessness. Children have voices. All they need is just a microphone for us to hear them louder. We don't need to give them a voice. We need to give them platforms where they can actually speak up, where their opinions can actually be taken seriously. So the question that I would like to pose about this child participation is, how does child participation look like in practice? We talk about it, we study about it, but how does it look like in practice? And keep in mind how we define and we define the standard, bearing in mind our own context. How does it look like in this?
Thank you, Tobeka.
This is that would deserve a pragmatic answer from practitioners, programs and initiatives, researchers, academics. I would like to pose out there. What is child participation in practice?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Tobeka. We really do appreciate your contribution. Don't leave. I'm going to ask the entire panel and Dr. Mphosa to turn your cameras back on. We are over time, but I'm going to allow for a little bit of engagement. I want to thank Dr. Mphosa for answering the questions in the chat and also in the Q&A section. He's been quite active. So Dr. Mphosa, if you can open your camera too and join us. Thank you to each of the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, in attendance, if you have any more questions that you haven't typed, you're welcome to raise your hand or type something in the chat box, and we can take a few minutes to address those. While we're doing that, Dr. Mphosa, would you like to respond to anything that our colleagues have said in their discussion so far? I'm going to ask each of you just to keep your responses quite brief, because I'd like to honor our colleagues' time and that we will end in the next 10 minutes. So we're going to wrap it up, but just with brief reflections. So Dr. Mphosa, your thoughts, your response. Your microphone is still muted, Prof, if you don't mind unmuting.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. John. I don't have a lot of comments, but just to thank the panel members for amplifying the voice, and we are all in agreement that children's issues need to be contextually located in terms of culture and stuff like that. And Professor Bula emphasized the education, and the education may not necessarily be the academic education. Formal education and awareness creation should take place for all to be able to contextualize and understand child rights issues. And Professor Mbele, you also spoke quite a lot around teenagers. And I like the LO and the MAX that we need to be addressing that as well. And that when we protect children, we protect ourselves, because whatever they become affects us in the future. Yeah. And then Professor Ntini, I like also your development of the master's program around that, so that we have a crop of people that are trained in this area, but also ensure that we balance the academic space together with the practical space on the ground where communities are located. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mposa, for that. I see there's quite an engaged audience in the chat. Mrs. Mnyeni says, yes, it takes a whole community to raise a child. And that very much sums up what we've been speaking about. I really also want to thank Mrs. Ntini Makununika for mentioning school social work. It's one of our passions in the Department of Social Work at the University of Zululand, and we intend to push that and encourage our students to seek placements there for their work integrated learning and fieldwork placements within schools. We are also trying to get funding for interns, unemployed social work graduates, to be able to do internships there. So thank you very much for that. Are there any other final thoughts from the panelists? I don't see any direct questions. Oh, there is one from Dr. Akpume. Is what is the responsibility for gaps between good policies and the crisis of poor or lack of implementation, the poor and lack of implementation? It's our tension all the time. We've got great policies and poor implementation. Does this suggest that perhaps those policies are being subtly disowned by society? Any thoughts on that, Dr. Mposa? Let's keep that our last reflection, and then we'll close. Policy implementation challenges.
You can push up. Go ahead, Prof. Bula.
Dr. Bula, do you want to say something from that on that?
Yes, I was wanting to know if it's appropriate for me to intervene.
Please do.
I think it just goes back to Dr. Maposa's comment about good people, because the gap is in the management of the programs. And in my opinion, if we, like I said to you, if you look at the simple policy on malnutrition, and that's been specifically articulated for children and for children's protection and their nutritional needs, for instance, the gaps in the implementation project is in the management line. Who is there to oversee it? Have we got the right people, the right personalities? Are management of these programs supported appropriately? So this, for me, from an academic space and from multiple stakeholder space, there needs to be greater investment, greater thought, greater commitment, and a priority created around that. And that's, for me, where I come from. Yeah.
Thank you. Prof. Mbele, do you want to say anything in conclusion? One last sentence.
Thank you, Prof. Ratzenberg, for giving me this platform. No, my contribution in this is that we do have things in place, but all of us, the finger should point at us. Let us not think of the community out there. Who is the community out there? In conclusion, Dr. Maposa said, wherever you are, because we might be working with university students who are no longer below the age of 18, but we are working with parents. When we talk about parents, these are the parents. They left their children at home to come. Most of them have got children. They left their children at home to come and study. And if we implement and we talk about these things, even here at university, we are also contributing towards protecting the child.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rebecca, your final thought? Rebecca, yes?
Oh, yes.
Your final
Yes,
thought?
I think to just sum it, for me, it would be engaging in a truly and practical, holistic approach when it comes to interventions and initiatives on children issues. It should be a holistic approach. We should not leave behind children themselves, which are the major people in the conversation and the dialogues we'll be having around this, but the community as well, academics, the institutions that are there, that are meant, that are created to protect children, the laws, the policies, how our community is engaging with those policies. If you are to ask a lot of people in communities, a mere person, they'd be like, I don't even know that exists. When are we taking those to the communities? When are we creating dialogues around those? Because communities can also keep government and institutions in check when they know what are the policies, what are the laws, and maybe that could be, I don't know, a way, a path to this practical, holistic approach. Yeah.
I think you're touching in the heart of this partnership that Nelson Mandela Children's Fund and UNIZULU are starting on. It's a journey to be able to advocate for the rights of children and the protection of children through research and through engagement. And we really do look forward to a long and fruitful relationship with the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. So in closing, Dr. Mphosa, your final word.
My final word, thank you very much, Moderator, Professor John. Talking about the implementation and the question that was asked earlier, I was told at face value when I was doing my PhD research and also in my advocacy work that we are talking about something good, but children and youth are not a funded mandate. I was told that statement by someone, I cannot quote, but I think we can make it happen from wherever we are located. And I think Professor Mbele, Dr. Mbele has indicated that all of us have a role in this. And our partnership with the University of Zululand is something that we are starting. We have not done this before, but we thought that it's a space that we can engage. Some of us are in the industry with children, but some of you are in the academic space. So the mixture of this and bringing in also government policymakers, bringing in other civil society players, bringing even business and individuals, together we can make a dent and a change on issues of children and youth in our country. Thank you.
Yes, we agree. That's such a powerful way to end this. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Mphosa, for those thoughts. My role now is to thank everybody for attending, our panelists and all those who've taken time out of their very busy schedule, whether you're on campus or off campus, to join this very important Vice Chancellor's webinar on Child Protection Week. I want to conclude and just thank a few people. Firstly, to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Mthose, for hosting this event and making sure that it is a continuing process that all the faculties have an opportunity to participate in. And I want to thank my team in the Applied Social Science Cluster for running with this vision. Professor Lulu Shakane represented the Vice Chancellor and got the ball rolling with a high tone, which challenged us to think about Child Protection Week holistically. Thank you very much, Professor Shakane, for your contribution. And also then to Professor Nzama, who welcomed our speaker and introduced him. Thank you very much, Professor Nzama, for your contribution. And you've been running with this vision to encourage academics in the faculty to participate in these Vice Chancellor webinar sessions. So thank you very much for pushing us and challenging us to continue. Then to our speaker, Dr. Stanley Maphosa, the Chief Program Officer from the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. We are so glad that we met earlier this year. We are so glad for the many initiatives that you've brought to our faculty already. These ideas for future collaboration and research, we can't wait to get stuck in and see how they unfold. And your willingness to be our guest speaker today has encouraged us. You've spoken and represented Nelson Mandela well. You've represented the Children's Fund well. And we thank you very much for thinking and challenging us. Your contribution was significant, it was academic, and it was practical, and we do appreciate your time and energy in the preparation and in the delivery of your lecture. Please also take our grateful thanks to your team, those people behind the scenes who strengthen your arms and hold them up as you deliver the important work of the foundation. Then to the discursants, those people who responded so wonderfully to the lecture, to Dr. Bula from sociology, to Professor Mbele from psychology, and to Mrs. Tobeka Ntini Makununika, our colleague from social work. We appreciate your insight, your contribution, and your vision. And I'm so glad that we're surrounded by academics in our faculty who've got a passion for children and child protection. We've gone slightly over time, so I'm going to wrap it up now by thanking everybody once again for participating, for those members of the general public who've joined us on YouTube, the academic community who've joined us on Zoom. I want to wish all the students who continue to support these initiatives all the very best with your examinations. And I want to wrap up once again by just saying my grateful thanks to everybody. Dr. Mposa, have a wonderful day, and goodbye to everybody. Goodbye and God bless you. Finally, before I say goodbye, one last thing. Our RCT support, Ayanda, and the CMD support from Mrs. Shamase. We couldn't have done this without you. So Ayanda, Mrs. Shamase, I didn't want to leave you out of my note of thanks. Thank you very much, Ayanda. You can now close the meeting.